Hi, everyone. We're just about ready to get started with our How Local Governments Can Buy Renewable Energy and Support Market Development webinar. We appreciate everybody who is willing and able to join us. So I guess with that, let's get started. So just a short agenda for everyone. We have, at this point, 4 different speakers, as well as Avery from the Solar Foundation, who will help us with the Q&A. But just a short agenda. I will be introducing the SolSmart program, which is the program that is putting on this webinar and helping to host this webinar. And who you're hearing from right now is Danny Falk from the Solar Foundation. So I'll get us started on that. And then after that point, I'll hand it off to Chad from Cadmus, who will be giving a short introduction on renewable energy purchasing options for local governments. And then after that, he'll throw it over to John from Arlington, and he will be talking about Arlington's virtual power purchasing agreement, which is one of the examples which local governments can potentially follow to purchase renewable energy on a local level. And then after that point, John will throw it over to Johnny, and he will speak about Denver's community solar project, which he helped in his role with the city and county of Denver. So with that, we'll get right into it with a little bit of background on the SolSmart program. So the SolSmart program is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Energy Technologies Office. Its goal is to help local governments make it faster, easier, and more affordable for businesses to go solar. Primarily, we do this by providing assistance, technical assistance at no cost, to help communities achieve one of our 3 designation levels, which highlights local solar achievements. The 3 designation levels are SolSmart Gold, Silver, and Bronze. And actually 2 of our communities, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that are speaking today, have achieved a SolSmart designation. So we're hopeful that other communities might be interested in joining as well. So if any attendees on the call are interested, you can feel free to follow back up with us, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later. But we essentially what we do is we help with what we call the soft costs of solar development. So these are details such as permitting, inspection, other aspects like that are non-hardware costs. We essentially help communities that are looking to find the best practices regarding solar permitting and solar inspection and other categories. We help those communities implement those aspects of their code or in their local policies in order to spur and reach their solar energy goals. These are a couple of the programs, the technical assistance and designation programs that assist us in our tasks, including one of our speakers today from Cadmus, helps with the SolSmart program as well. As mentioned, 2 communities were designated SolSmart will be speaking as well. So again, just a little bit of background on the categories that we help with and we provide technical assistance on to communities that are interested, or counties that are interested, or any local municipalities that are interested, or regional organizations. So again, permitting, planning, zoning development, construction codes, the whole 9 yards here. We help with different aspects of these categories. And as mentioned, the 2 communities speaking, Denver and Arlington, are both designated. Denver being designated SolSmart Gold, Arlington designated SolSmart Bronze. And this is just a little bit of background information, just to say that essentially this is supported by the DOE's Office of Energy and Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, but this is not a guarantee of any kind of background from the U.S. government or any essentially recommendation or anything along those lines. This is just prepared from the Solar Foundation and from our presenters, and there's no guarantee of favoring by the U.S. government on any of these factors. So with that in mind, I'm going to throw it over to our first speaker, or second speaker after me, I suppose, Chad Laurent from Cadmus, and he's going to get us started with a short introduction to local governments and how they can, the different ways they can procure renewable energy.
Great, thanks, Danny. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks, thanks everyone for joining. I hope everyone is staying healthy and well and hanging in there in these sort of unprecedented and challenging times. As Danny mentioned, all of those categories like that include soft costs, so permitting and zoning, all of those add up to, more than half the cost of a solar installation is driven by non-equipment costs. And so I think one of the key drivers for municipalities to help reduce the cost of solar is making it easier to do solar. So that's really what we're trying to do with the SolSmart designation program. And the context here for how do you buy renewable energy is that over 150 cities, 10 counties, and 7 states now have adopted ambitious 100% renewable energy targets. Many others have 80 by 50 or 0 by 50. And a few cities have reached those targets using different methods, including Aspen, Burlington, Vermont, Georgetown, Texas, Greensburg, and a few others, right, have hit that 100% renewable target using different strategies. But I want to walk through how do you go about buying renewable energy if you're a municipality, and how do you procure that renewable energy to help you meet your climate and renewable energy targets. Next slide. And so as you'll see, there is no one clear path to charting a clean energy future and buying renewables. They're complicated, and as I tell my colleagues from Germany, when they ask, what does the U.S. solar policy look like, I say that we have at least 50, because each state has its own unique solar policy, and then within each state, depending on the type of utility you have layers of additional types of solar policies that enable or disable different pathways for purchasing renewables. Next slide. So I probably don't need to explain to you, those of you on the call, because that's why you're here, but why are folks interested in buying renewable energy? So there's the climate impacts, the greenhouse gas reduction, there's potential economic and financial benefits, reducing dependence on fossil fuels, price security, as in that once you build a renewable energy generator, there is no ongoing fuel cost, particularly if it's solar, wind, and geothermal. Supporting broader environmental and social goals. Again, typically dirty power plants and other things are located in communities that have historically not benefited from clean energy and have suffered more greatly from environmental and social justice. And then displaying leadership, so showing that communities are moving in the right direction and doing what they can to either meet Paris or other agreements and moving ahead in deep decarbonization goals. Next slide. Part of this growth in solar in particular is due to falling prices, right? So over a 70% decline over the last decade. And so that includes all the time that I've been helping procure renewables for cities and towns. Was recently reminiscing this morning about helping consult to the city of Boston on the first 2 solar installations on Boston public schools back when the cost was probably $8 or $9 a watt. It's a lot different nowadays, and because of that, the payback is shorter, the return on investment is higher, and it allows to demonstrate that those prices, and in particular for even large solar installations, are often competitive or better than natural gas and other fossil fuels, depending on where those projects are located. So there's a lot of different reasons to go solar, and falling pricing is making it easier. Next slide. So I'm going to briefly touch on these different procurement pathways. How do you go about buying renewable energy? And certainly each of these could be its own standalone webinar, again, given that each of the 50 states has its own solar policy. So I will touch on each of these in turn, and then our speakers, John and Johnny, will get into a little bit more details about two of these options that are a little bit more innovative that they chose to pursue. So you can read these on your own time, and we'll share the slides. So I'm going to go over them. Next slide. Again, setting a little bit of the context for these is that within the U.S. there are deregulated markets where you can select a competitive retail supplier other than the utility to supply you the electricity portion of your bill, and then you continue to pay the investor-owned utility the wires part of your bill. So there's a handful of states, mostly in the Northeast, that have deregulated, some partial deregulation. In Georgia, it's just natural gas that is deregulated, not electricity. A few states have community choice aggregation, which I'll get to, but not very many. So it's a pathway that's open to those states, but not others. And then power purchase agreements, also referred to as third-party ownership model, which I'll describe, also allowed in the states with the darkest color here, but not every state. And again, just highlighting that each of these pathways, you're going to have to look for yourself in terms of what is the local state energy context in which you're operating. And one of the reports that we published called Pathways to 100, which I'm sure many of you have either heard of or listened to different webinars on that topic, helps to outline sort of what state policies impact which of these purchasing pathways are available to you. Next slide. So the first is renewable energy certificates or RECs. And legally, in order to say I'm buying renewable energy, I have to own a REC to do that. And a renewable energy certificate is just an accounting instrument, a sort of legal fiction that is used to track renewables, designed for utilities to track their purchase of renewables to meet state mandates for utilities to buy a certain percentage of renewables. They prove that by buying RECs. And then others can buy these RECs to make that same claim. So it's separate from the actual electrons, and you could go out and buy renewable energy certificates on the market from a project located pretty much anywhere in the United States. Depending on where that generator is located, the REC is worth a different value. Again, depending on the state energy context, the renewable portfolio standard prices in the market. So some communities have met their 100% target legally in terms of their ability to define 100% renewable purchase by going out on the market and buying enough RECs to equal their electricity usage. Then there's a lot of discussion around additionality and did that really make a difference? And it's really just a premium. You just buy those RECs and you can say I'm 100% renewable, but many communities are looking to say, well, we want more than just that. We want price stability and we want other benefits, long-term hedge or long-term price stability or energy savings, not just the renewable energy certificate. So that's one relatively easy pathway that is available to anyone, but many communities look beyond that to get additional benefits from their renewable energy purchase. Next slide. So one of the most obvious is to own and operate a renewable energy system. Typically, municipalities do not have a lot of money sitting around to be able to spend the upfront costs on a renewable energy system. However, bonds, depending on the municipality, have a relatively low interest rate. So we've seen communities put out a bond, do a procurement to own and install and operate a solar PV system. Municipalities aren't typically going anywhere. So over the lifetime of that project, it definitely pays off in most places, but it's coming up with that upfront capital that could be spent elsewhere. That is one of the barriers to owning and operate. So it's usually financed through a bond. We've seen other communities include it in the cost of a new building. They would require it to be solar. Some jurisdictions have solar ready requirements or actual solar requirements for new buildings or for new schools, or embedded in the cost of a roof replacement and asking the roofer to include solar photovoltaics when they're replacing the roof. So own and operate, one sort of obvious way, but has challenges of coming up with the upfront cash to do that, or choosing to spend the bond on that. Next slide. Community choice aggregation. This is, again, only available within states that have enacted it, and then also within states that have a deregulated market. And here, a municipality will go out and find a third-party supplier for, again, that electricity part of the bill. They go out and buy that on behalf of all of their customers within the municipality, including residential customers, and the municipality often is included in that. And then they require the CCA, Community Choice Administrator of that program, to include a higher percentage of renewables in that purchase. So the CCA administrator and the third-party supplier goes out and contracts with more renewables, or they buy additional RECs to match the usage and get both members of the community themselves and also the municipality a higher percentage of renewables. So that's probably the fastest way of describing community choice aggregation. And also just add that it looks very different in California than it does, say, in New York or Massachusetts or even Ohio. So those states that have enabled CCAs and are in deregulated markets, some of the things they're doing in California are not as easily accomplished in other states, and also vice versa. Things that are done in Massachusetts or New York, you couldn't necessarily structure a CCA the same way in some of the other states. Next slide. This is sort of an individual level type of element similar to CCA, in that in those deregulated markets, when a municipality is going out to find a competitive retail supplier, you can ask that retail supplier to give the municipality a product that has a higher percentage of renewables. And what we've also seen municipalities begin to do is make sure that it's not just additional RECs to get us a higher percentage of renewables, but actually go out and sign contracts, embedded contracts with a renewable energy provider that is, the technical term is like sleeved into the supply from the third-party supplier, that includes some sort of price hedging element or fixed price element. So there, and again, in those places that have competitive retail markets, you can begin to ask more of a competitive retail supplier in terms of giving you a higher percentage of renewables. Next slide. Another innovative program, and this is for states that aren't deregulated. So this is where you have an investor-owned utility that is typically vertically integrated. They can offer different utility tariffs. And what we've seen is that large users have been able to have some leverage with the utility to be able to request a different type of product from the utility. One example is, I believe Amazon in Iowa requested a utility green tariff for their data center, and the utility was able to offer them a different type of product. And I think John Morrill will speak to this. There's opportunities to partner with private entities. This isn't exactly what John is going to talk about. He's going to be talking about a virtual PPA, but there's opportunities to go in with commercial entities, other large energy users, of which some municipalities are also large energy users, go to the utility and say, can you offer me something that is a higher percentage of renewables, that's a fixed price, that is 100% wind? And so some utilities have begun offering some of those what are referred to as green tariff programs. Next slide. Power purchase agreements. These are allowed in those states that have third-party ownership enabled, and this is where a solar installer will say, I'll build the system, I'll own and operate it. We'll treat it as if the municipality had built and owned it. So the meter sort of runs backwards at that facility, or the facility that the solar is on gets what are referred to as the net metering credits, sort of acting as if the solar is owned by the municipal entity. And then the third party says, I'll build it, I'll own it, no upfront cost. You get the savings, but you give some of those savings back to me as the third party installer. And so typically there's anywhere from a 10 or 15% discount off the price of electricity in exchange for a third party owner of owning and operating the system. So in those states where PPAs are allowed or third-party ownership is allowed, municipalities have taken advantage of PPAs, in particular because one of the main federal incentives for renewables is the investment tax credit, of which municipalities and nonprofits are not able to take advantage of. And so under that direct ownership model, they're typically taking at this point a 26% hit in terms of not being able to take that tax credit off the top. And so under this model, the third-party commercial owner is able to take the tax credit and essentially by offering a 10% discount off the electricity, monetize that tax credit and get some of those savings back to the municipality. Here, instead of saying commercial solar customer, it should be a municipal solar customer. But that's roughly how a PPA works. Next slide. This is a more complicated version of a PPA called a virtual PPA. And this has been used more frequently in the corporate world, where corporations have looked at the utility and said they're not offering the renewable product that I want. We're a sophisticated buyer, and I think there's a way for us to get the benefits of renewable energy sort of going around the utility in order to do that. So the way that these are structured is that you have a renewable energy generator who is connected to a wholesale market, say in Texas or Oklahoma, or PJM, which is sort of the Atlantic wholesale market, or ISO New England, which is the New England market, or NISO in New York. A renewable energy generator builds and sells into the wholesale market. And essentially what that renewable energy generator says is, look, I'm going to sell it into the market. I need, let's say I need 5 cents in order per kilowatt hour in order for me to make enough money to build this project. Right now, wholesale prices are 6 cents. I only need 5. But what would be really helpful to me is to have a long-term contract with someone who can guarantee me 5 cents. And so what this virtual PPA does is an entity anywhere within the country can say, you know what, I'll guarantee that you get that 5 cents if you give me any of your revenue above 5 cents. So in this example, the renewable energy generator is getting 6 cents in the wholesale market. They give that extra cent to a municipality or a corporation who has signed that contract and made that sort of guarantee. The downside is that if the renewable energy generator is only getting 4 cents, then you have to essentially pay the generator that 1 cent that they weren't getting. But that would be structured just like any other PPA, but this framework allows it to happen outside of the city, outside of the state, or even outside of the region. So it allows anyone to sign this type of deal and essentially provide ideally a form of revenue or savings from the project over a long period of time. But there have to be a lot of accountants and lawyers involved, and it's a fairly novel and unique type of arrangement, but it's been proven to be working in many cases for corporations and then some municipalities, which we'll learn about in a little bit. Next slide. And then community solar, another sort of example of where municipalities can play a role. And in this, there has to be either community solar legislation enabled by the state, or again, in one of those deregulated markets. And here a solar developer develops a relatively large system or a larger solar installation, and then passes along those benefits to people who sign up to be part of the community solar installation. And oftentimes, a community solar installer is, they need to have guaranteed that there's a certain number of people that will sign up to the program. And there are sometimes limits on, a particularly large customer, how much of the community solar project can they take a share of. And we've seen municipalities think about offering sort of backstop support for a community solar installation, whereas if they don't find enough other customers, the municipality will step in and take one of those shares and take the savings from the community solar installation, or go in from the beginning to say, we'll commit to buying 10 or 20% or something of the output of a community solar installation, or they work with a community solar installer to facilitate getting additional customers and helping bring people to the project and to the program. So that's a simple summary of community solar, which we'll also hear a little bit more about. Next slide. So as you're thinking about selecting these pathways, or how do you go about buying renewable energy, again, thinking about what is the state context in which you're operating in. The additionality question comes up when it's just renewable energy certificates. So that's a conversation that many begin to wade into. Looking at sort of local impacts, do you want a project that's located in the city, within the state, within the region, or anywhere? Or maybe you want to support a project that's in one of the dirtier grids within the US, and so you're having potentially a larger impact from a CO2 reduction standpoint, but maybe not from a local job creation standpoint. The complexity of the transactions vary, as well as the associated sort of contracting and different legal costs. And then some, have a greater ability to save money or provide a hedge against electricity price volatility than others. So there's all different sort of criteria to weigh and determine sort of what your priorities are. Next slide. And so how do you get started, right? So ideally first sort of think about what your goals are and priorities. You need to know what your current and future energy usage are. Are there schools that are either coming online or offline, or other municipal buildings that will impact how much energy you want to go out and procure on behalf of? Like, you wouldn't want to sign a virtual power purchase agreement or a PPA for 100% of your load if you're expecting, huge energy efficiency projects to come on board at different schools, or a school to go offline, which would then reduce the amount of energy you're using as a municipality, and you would be therefore locked into a contract for more than you needed. It's not typically the case, but that does happen, where you might be using less electricity over time. Making sure you've identified appropriate stakeholders, both within the community, but also where the project is located. So you don't want to necessarily be buying from a controversial project per se, although any project usually has some form of controversy associated with it, because you're building a large solar or wind array somewhere, and not everyone is always happy with that decision. But being informed of where projects are located, whether it's within the community or not, is important. Worked with the municipality that there was a public meeting that went on until midnight, because there were 12 trees being cut down to make room for some solar canopies within the community, despite the solar installer agreeing to plant double that number in exchange for cutting down and trimming those few trees. So even a local installation can have different barriers. So making sure you're involving stakeholders, and then choosing the pathway. And I would just say that there isn't one. So many communities do some combination of RECs, a virtual power purchase agreement, on-site solar, PPAs, community solar. Depending on the jurisdiction, you could do all of these different options, and there's no reason that you have to pick just one. And so I think one of the important things to keep in mind too is to take advantage of the opportunities that you have in front of you, and then be able to reevaluate over time, or add additional pathways when they become available, and sort of keep moving in the right direction. And next slide, I think that should be it. Great. So John, over to you.
Thank you, Chad. That was a great overview, and I'm going to be picking this up, talking about a specific project that we did in Arlington, and I'll be referencing some of those other programs in my explanation of why we did what we did. Next slide, please. So just to orient you, Arlington County is in Northern Virginia. We are just across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. In the photograph, that's one of our commercial districts in the foreground with the river and bridges, and then that's Washington, D.C. in the background. We are geographically small with a high population, and as that commercial district suggests, there's not a whole lot of room for solar here in Arlington. We do have rooftops like everyone else. It's just that the amount of energy we consume is considerably more than what we could produce here. Residents are very highly educated and higher income than average, and they tend to be progressive politically, and so we've been leaning forward into environmental issues for a number of years. Arlington, aside from being home to a number of federal workers, we're known for being the site of the Arlington National Cemetery and the Pentagon and the new Amazon second headquarters. Next slide, please. So we completed a community energy plan in 2013. And in 2018, we began a process to revise it because it had been 5 years. But it was also striking that there had been phenomenal change in the energy worlds in the 5 years since 2013. So we set about doing a revision, and it was adopted in September last year, which changed our goal to be a carbon neutral community. And it also put in policy goals for us to be 100% renewable electricity for county government operations by 2025 and 50% renewable electricity by 2022. And those are the lead by example goals that are prepped for the community-wide goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2035. So right there in 2019, we had thrown down the goal of 100% renewable electricity in a pretty short period of time, and so we had to get busy doing that. I mentioned that Arlington's an urban county and land is scarce, so we had to, for county government operations, we had to be thinking about quick, bold action. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram of a virtual power purchase agreement that is a variation on what Chad had shown from EPA Green Power Partnership. This diagram shows, okay, Arlington County, there's the energy buyer. PJM interconnection at the bottom of the graphic, that's the independent system operator that operates our grid. And it turns out that the virtual power purchase agreement deal that we entered into was developed by Dominion Energy, who is also our traditional utility. An independent solar developer had originally secured the leases for the land for the solar farm, and they had done a lot of the prep work, and Dominion essentially went in and bought those rights, and then they ended up being the entity that we contracted with. This diagram shows, again, it's really the same information, but just a different presentation of it. It shows the flows of money, and it shows the flow of both the power and the renewable energy certificates. Next slide, please. So a number of people have asked us, why did you do the deal with Dominion? They're your monopoly electric utility provider. And part of our answer was, well, yes, because they're our monopoly utility provider. Virginia is still, well, historically, Virginia has been a relatively conservative, traditional regulated monopoly state and the utility was pretty powerful politically. Progress toward solar and efficiency had been gradual and slow, and there were even a number of laws on the books that added hurdles for power purchase agreements, hurdles on net metering, hurdles on community solar. And so in a way, our options were somewhat limited. At the same time, we understood that if we needed to achieve our goals, the utility is not going to go anywhere. The utility, because of its sheer size and influence, was starting to show signs of change, and they were starting to shift. And so we had made a decision, and this is one of many factors that was playing into all of this, but we realized that it would be better for us to work with the utility as a partner, in a way helping show them, you know, the new approach, the cleaner energy, and of course intuitively they knew that stuff, but the notion was let's do a partnership so that we can take steps into this new future together. And so that was important, and then it was also not trivial that unlike say commercial and residential customers who have electric rates that are controlled or regulated by the State Corporation Commission, Arlington and all other school systems and jurisdictions, we actually have a separate contract with Dominion, and we're about 6% of their load, all aggregated. And so that actually offered us a procurement pathway that was pretty direct and relatively simple. And so again, in the theme of partnering and working together, we were one of a number of others who were working with Dominion on clean energy projects. Next slide, please. And so the last note on this is that you may have heard, it was news around here, of course it's hyper-local Virginia, but Dominion sold off their entire gas business and canceled a major pipeline that they had been investing in just in late July. And with that, they were essentially announcing a shift, a strategic business shift to go and rededicate themselves to retail, a regulated retail entity with strong clean energy goals. And this had been building over a period of time. The governor had been, governor and legislation had been making progress. And so I'm not going to say that our deal led them to this move to sell their gas, but it showed that partnering helped, you know, in whatever small way, one more straw helped things shift. Next slide, please. So what is the deal we made? It's a 1,500 acre solar farm that's going to be built in Pittsylvania County, Virginia. It was important to us that the farm be in Virginia. This happens to be over 200 miles south of us. Virginia is a big state, but it's still in the PJM region. It's a 120 megawatt peak facility. The lead customer is Amazon. That's not a coincidence. I mentioned that we are home to HQ2, and so there had been some discussion of, and Amazon has a number of deals with Dominion because they have a lot of data centers, data farms in Virginia. And so they've been leaning into clean power purchases, and they offered us a piece of this farm, and our piece is about 30%. And this will satisfy about 90% of our government's annual electricity use. It's now under construction, expected to be operational in 2022, and it's for 17 years contract term. Next slide, please. So just a few highlights. Chad mentioned the financial transaction nature of a VPPA. That's exactly what this is. There's no capital outlay by the county. And it also provides an opportunity for us to expand our partnership with Dominion. These are high quality renewable energy credits. We get credit for as one of the customers that they signed, which really enables them to do that project. We get the credit for helping bring that out of the ground. The site was predominantly agricultural land, relatively little tree coverage, and it's again, it's in-state. It happens that that county, Pittsylvania County, has made solar, utility scale solar development an actual part of their economic development strategy. Next slide, please. This is, just want to make the point that the single biggest risk for us is, as Chad mentioned, what if the wholesale price of electricity stays very low? And what if it's below the $3.35 per megawatt hour that we're paying for wholesale? Well, then it would be that it's actually costing us more than we intended. One mitigating factor against that is that if the wholesale price of electricity stays low for a long time, that also means that the retail price for electricity that we're going to be paying will go down. So that helps offset some of that. I can't show you the proprietary electricity price forecast that we purchased to give us confidence that we were getting a decent deal, but I can point to the long-term price of natural gas forecast. Of course, this is pre-COVID, and we thought that we were making a good deal. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? Of course, hindsight is 2020. I've since in discussions with others, including the American Cities Climate Challenge, know that there was in a way a bit of a penalty for being the first actor for one of these VPPAs by a locality. There might be, in some cases, wasn't really sure of which questions to ask. And so, we might be a little bit exposed on some risk that I hadn't anticipated, but we're likely to do another one of these, and armed with more questions, better questions. It's likely to be competitive, and we'll be working with other public and/or private partners in Virginia and in Arlington to with us, because we don't need a big chunk anymore, but we could be a part of a bigger deal, and that helps you get a better rate. And so there are resources emerging like SolSmart, like this American Cities Climate Challenge, on navigating these, and as more of us get experience, we're happy to share that. Thank you, and I'll pass it now to Jonathan Rogers.
Great. Thanks very much for that. Hi, everyone. I am Johnny Rogers. I'm the Renewable Energy Specialist for the City and County of Denver. Looking forward to telling you a bit about our work. And before I talk about our community solar effort, I want to give you some context as to why we're taking the approach that we are. And that kind of starts in changing Denver's mindset a little bit and how we define and reach our goals. So you can go to the next slide. So in 2018, the mayor made a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050 from a 2005 baseline across the entire economy in Denver. And we actually just finished up a years-long public engagement effort for our Climate Action Task Force, and they came back even bolder, calling for a 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. So 20% more, 10 years faster. And at the center of that report was really the emphasis on, yes, there are a lot of ways in which we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we can also make sure that those investments, those policy changes, the things that Denver are doing, will also advance equity and racial justice. So next slide, please. So electricity decarbonization is really foundational to pretty much everything that we're doing. When we look at our emissions inventory in Denver, a huge percentage is coming from grid electricity and that power in buildings and homes. Then also all of the transportation emissions and heating emissions, those may end up shifting towards electricity as we pursue really aggressive beneficial electrification objectives. So we need to make sure that the electric grid is decarbonizing rapidly to handle those additional loads. And when we think about, well, how do we want to decarbonize our electricity supply, we need to focus on those objectives and what's really going to matter the most to systems level decarbonization. We're fortunate that Xcel Energy, our monopoly utility in Colorado and in the Denver area, has set very aggressive targets for their own carbon reduction trajectory, and those have actually been adopted into Colorado law, where Xcel will have to reduce their carbon footprint 80% by 2030 and then 100% by 2050. So we need to be thinking about how do we actually hit those targets faster? What are the investments that we make that really drive those systemic changes rather than, say, claiming renewable energy credits that are already within the system? And as we're making those investments or calling on taxpayers to pay a little bit more for municipal power or be thinking about how we move more quickly, how do we make sure that we are investing locally and empowering the community while doing so? Next slide. We've just released our 100% renewable electricity action plan this past week. You can find it on denvergov.org/solar. And we had to reshape our mission and no longer say that we want to be powered by 100% renewable electricity, because that means that we would need to own all the RECs. So we want to enable a rapid and equitable transition to a 100% renewable electric system in Colorado. And we want to make sure that our community-wide electric use is contributing to that goal and prioritizing investments locally in renewable energy sources, including when we create RECs and then they're transferred to Xcel Energy through their solar rewards or community solar programs. And by investing locally and focusing on this local impact, ensuring that we're maximizing co-benefits such as creating workforce opportunities, helping our municipal government save on our utility bills and also drive bill savings for low-income customers or other members of the community. And through local investments in distributed energy resources, trying to increase the resilience of our public facilities and ensuring that we will be able to more effectively integrate the various systems, whether it's new load coming on from building electrification or transportation electrification, and ensuring that all of these play nicely and function well with additional renewables, battery storage, so that we can really achieve a functional and affordable 100% renewable electric grid. Next slide. I think as you've heard throughout this, the term additive renewable energy capacity being really important, and that's really why we had to rethink and change our goal. If you look at Colorado's or Xcel Energy's Colorado power supply in 2019, they claim 30% carbon-free energy. But it's very convenient that they can talk about, well, what is the fuel source of the power that they are generating? They don't need to say that this is actually delivered to customers. When you account for more than 3 million RECs that are sold annually to California community choice aggregators, the percentage of power, the renewable content of the power that's actually delivered to customers is much lower, in that range of 20–21%. And then looking at Denver's renewable electricity hierarchy, the amount of power that's being put onto the grid from distributed solar in Denver is about 1%. And then the members of the community that are looking for the subscriptions to renewable electricity options in which they actually receive REC ownership, that's actually less than 1%. So we have a long ways to go, and our focus is really how do we increase that additive renewable energy capacity and really focus on that distributed solar number, recognizing that there's a lot of untapped potential for us to expand into. Next slide. So that leads to our community solar initiative. We're fortunate in Colorado that there is legislation that allows for community solar programs. Unfortunately, the RECs are transferred to Xcel Energy. The customer does not have an opportunity to retain them. But in our opinion, the utility is a partner. They're managing the entire system, which needs to be cleaner. So if we're receiving an incentive payment for giving them a REC, which will help to make the entire system that we are a part of cleaner, that will enable us to build more solar and expand our programs and help more of the residents in our community. So we've actually signed a contract now where we'll be hosting up to 15 megawatts of community solar gardens on municipal properties. So things like city building rooftops, over parking lots, vacant land near our airport or at our landfill. Anywhere that we do a solar canopy structure at a parking lot, we're taking steps to make sure that we can co-locate with electric vehicle charging infrastructure that'll be publicly accessible. Because of the economies of scales of our program, we believe that we'll be able to receive bill savings for our municipal operations, as well as for low-income residents that we can share power with because of the community solar approach. A certain percentage of our power, we've set a 10% minimum and will hopefully be much higher than that, will be earmarked for low-income residents. And we've also worked with, as part of our solicitation process for our community solar development partner, ensuring that there are workforce development programs and student education programs that we will be able to administer over the next year or 2 years as we're going through system design and construction. And then the last thing is really important to us is making sure that projects are very visible. We want people in the community to be able to see a solar canopy going up at the parking lot in their rec center that they can point to and say, Denver is making good on their promise that we're taking steps forward towards this clean energy future, and I can actually subscribe to that power. That's where I'm a part of this as well. And creating this framework in a way and using the financial institutions and developer community that have been creating a pretty robust community solar market in Colorado gives us a pathway in which we'll deploy solar in Denver at no upfront cost to the city, which is critically important always, and especially right now, given everything that's happening with the current public health and economic crisis from COVID-19. So demonstrating that somebody else can finance it and we'll be buying power back at a net savings for our facilities and achieving multiple co-benefits for our community. Next slide. We feel very lucky that we've been selected by the Colorado Department of Local Affairs with a $1 million award, which really helps us to test out a lot of these concepts. A lot of the things that we're doing from our understanding really haven't been done before, and this grant funding, while $1 million isn't enough to build 15 megawatts of solar if you pay for it outright, it gives us some flexibility to test out some of the ideas that we're putting forward, so that we're actually hoping that we'll be able to build $40 million worth of solar. And this is, I think, will be particularly important to test out our portfolio-based approach, in which we're using multiple sites so that we can take the higher cost site at a parking lot via a solar canopy, but also high value because of the community visibility and other co-benefits, couple it with lower cost rooftop sites or ground mount systems, so that in aggregate, we will still be saving money on our utility bills and able to successfully move forward with our comprehensive program. Next slide. As I mentioned, community impact is really critical to what we're trying to accomplish. And because the city is the one leading the procurement and also signing the site lease agreements, essentially giving the solar developer the right to put their panels on our property at no cost, whereas in an alternate arrangement or the traditional community solar model, they may be paying a lease fee to a landowner to put their array on that property. We can include some pretty significant community programs and benefits that we think are really important to ensuring that we retain community support and are given essentially the stamp of public approval to look for opportunities to expand this. Next slide. I talked about the solar portfolio approach, and I like to think of it as unlocking solar potential, where that solar canopy over a parking lot that is cooking in the sun most days out of the year is too expensive to build on its own, or you might not be able to achieve a positive return on investment when financing that project. When looping it into this broader portfolio, now all of a sudden that project that wouldn't have been able to be built, we can get more solar onto the grid. And by having this larger portfolio and having Denver be a committed off-taker of as much of the power as possible while preserving our carve out for low income and residential subscribers, we provide financial security to the investor, gives them confidence to move forward with some of our more innovative ideas that they might consider a little risky on other projects. Next slide. So to give you all a sense of how this works, first, definitely need to make sure that you have a strong partner, someone that's going to be able to help you achieve all of your goals, and including in that solicitation, making sure you emphasize what are the things that you want to accomplish as part of your program. We're using a master services agreement. There's no money that exchanges hands through this, but it provides the legal framework for us to work with that developer to do site evaluations, look at our rooftops, look at our parking lots, and figure out what is the best portfolio that we can put together to achieve our objectives and ensure that we do so in a way that's economically viable. Once we have that portfolio selected and we've gone through the process of submitting it to our utility program and receiving our interconnection agreements, we can actually sign the lease agreements to say, yes, you can put solar on our property. Simultaneously, we'll sign power purchase agreements in which the city will be an off-taker of a portion of the power from the solar that we host, and we'll simultaneously be helping to encourage local residents and nonprofits with low-income subscriptions. The operations and maintenance, it's the responsibility of the solar developer and the financer, who is technically the owner and operator of those systems, to ensure that they continue to function the way that they are supposed to, reduces our risk. And any energy cost savings to the city, we can then reinvest into additional energy and efficiency programs. And hopefully this is just the first of multiple iterations of this. Next slide. We call out three big benefits to our stakeholders and city leadership, letting them know that this is a no-cost way in which we can advance our citywide climate goals. Ideally, we're going to be realizing economic benefits over the life of the project, both for municipal operations and for members of the community, and then building off of that community focus, demonstrating all of the additional impacts and co-benefits that we can achieve, has really helped us to build support internally and with other important stakeholders in Denver. Next slide. So we're still relatively early in the process, and we've been working on this since last September, but we're finally at a point in which we're going through site audits, we're working on technical analysis and designs to hopefully put together that portfolio that is going to make the most sense for our program and give us the highest opportunity to actually receive interconnection awards from Xcel Energy. That will occur likely in early October, in which we submit our interconnection requests. Once we hear back from them in the January-ish timeframe, we will know for certain what sites we'll be able to include in the portfolio and have kind of final determinations for our rate structures and subscribers and all of the other things that we need to do to make this project successful. Next slide. As I mentioned, we're working through the site selection and due diligence process, and it's really important that we have large anchor projects, things like a big ground mount array either at the airport or at our landfill, that can help to effectively subsidize some of the other higher value projects that we want to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity to develop. Last slide, please. So that's what we're doing, and we're really excited about it. We think it's innovative, and we think that it will really make a meaningful difference, not just in advancing our climate objectives, but providing as much benefit to the community as possible. And in addition to all of that technical work that we're doing, we need to be very focused on our community engagement strategy and keeping the public informed and the people who live in the neighborhoods that might be affected by these projects, keeping them informed about what we're doing and making sure that they are aware of and have opportunities to participate in this program. And that is it. Was unable to leave any time for questions, but hopefully there's still some people on.
Thanks, Johnny. Yep, this is Danny again. So we're just going to run through a quick conclusion, and if our panelists do have any extra time, maybe a couple of them could stay on to answer any questions that come in. We're going to run through a real quick Q&A, but first, we have a few additional resources here. It's also worth mentioning that this webinar will be, this is the third webinar in a series of webinars on how to procure more renewable energy. First webinar being local government strategies for 100% clean energy. And then that was more of a goal setting webinar. And then a second webinar going through details on community choice aggregation. So both those webinars, as well as this webinar, will be on our Go SolSmart YouTube page. So if you want to check out either of those webinars or see this webinar again, feel free to check those out, as well as any of the resources that you can see here on this page. And again, just to reiterate, this is put on by the SolSmart program. We provide technical assistance for no cost on different solar pathways, as mentioned throughout this presentation and the previous presentations, and again, available to all municipalities, counties, and regional organizations. So if you need any more information, feel free to reach out to us at info@SolSmart, and we'll get back with you and help with any assistance you need, and we hope to hear from you guys. But with that, I'll go real quick to our Q&A session. So how this is going to work is if anyone has any questions outstanding, we're going to give about just about a minute for everyone to send in any questions they're interested in, and maybe if our panelists can stay on, and they may be able to help answer a few questions that come in. And I'm going to hand off, when we come back from our minute break, I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Avery Palmer, and he will present some of those questions for us.
I'm happy to stay on and answer a few questions. It's Johnny.
Happy to stay on as well. And I guess just to be clear, people should use the chat function at the bottom of the menu.
Actually, there is a, I believe there is an area to send in questions on the attendee side. So if the attendees can feel free to send in there, that should be a good way to do it. Although if there are any questions in the chat, we can probably see it there as well. So yeah, just a little bit of background there, and we'll hold tight and see what kind of questions we get.
Hi, this is Avery Palmer at the Solar Foundation. I'll start with this question for John Merrill. The question is Virginia a regulated or deregulated state? So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on the status of electricity regulation in Virginia.
We're still a largely regulated state. Electricity.
Great, thanks.
It was only this spring was legislation passed that set things like renewable portfolio standard and energy efficiency standard, but such such tools that often animate the market had been absent.
Thank you. I'll answer another question really quick. Somebody asked for clarification on how to re-listen to this webinar or look at the slides. And there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can go to our YouTube page, as Danny said. Additionally, it will be available directly on our website, solsmart.org. And we will send an email shortly afterward to all attendees to make sure you have the link to the recording and webinar slides. Another question is, are smaller cities and towns, generally speaking, less able to manage projects like this? I'm not sure if anyone wants to tackle that.
Well, I'm curious if they mean VPPA projects or community solar. In the context of community solar and what we're doing in Denver, I would say absolutely. And our goal is to make all of our contract templates and framework for how we're doing it available to really any community in the country. And hopefully there are folks in areas that have enabling legislation for community solar so that they can follow our lead. But once you are working with that solar developer and they kind of help you understand where is the best site in terms of solar technical potential and what does that mean in terms of just aligning so that you know you're not going to tear down that building for the next 20 years, or you don't need a major roof renovation or anything like that, or you can put a solar canopy somewhere. It's their responsibility to do the construction, to manage those assets, and the city is purely a beneficiary in receiving power offtake. And ideally, you can work it into your contract so that it's a guaranteed savings compared to what you would have been paying your utility. If anything breaks, it's the solar developer's responsibility to come and fix it. At the end of the lifetime of the agreement, it's their responsibility to come and take everything away and return the area to its original condition. So we think of it as a very low risk, so long as from the outset you identify what those risks are, what those requirements are, and then have stable enough contracts to ensure that all of those objectives are met over the lifetime of the agreement.
Okay, thank you. Should have time for at least one more question. Making sure I understand this question. In Denver, what has been the utility position relative to the impact of, what has been the utility position relative to increased community renewables impact on utility demand? Johnny, does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, so it's certainly a sensitive situation in which the more community solar that we build and subscribe to or deploy on our facilities, the less that we are buying from the utility. And so that's a kind of delicate line to walk, and to still try to keep them on board as a supporter in our objectives. We signed a memorandum of understanding with them and with Xcel Energy in 2018, in which the utility committed to help us reach our clean energy goals. And we've re-upped that this past year. And the Community Solar Initiative is one of our work plan implementation projects, one of 6 to try to keep things focused. I think they started to recognize that the community solar legislation, the laws that are in place, call for a certain amount of community solar to be added to the system each year. But the way in which that was happening was really concentrated and out in a field somewhere, kind of middle of nowhere, bigger and bigger projects, almost becoming mini utilities that were competing with them, versus the intent of the legislation really being, how do you get more community solar in the community? So our idea really gave them an approach to say, hey, this can hit the objectives of actually getting solar built in high load areas where we think it may have a grid benefit at some point in the future, being closer to where electricity is actually being used, and great from a public relations campaign perspective for them. The 15 megawatts is still a drop in the bucket compared to their 7,000 megawatt peak load on their system every year. As we continue to go through this, and if there are opportunities to expand, maybe they'll start to push back and say, we're encroaching on their monopoly territory. But we're also working at the Public Utilities Commission on things like performance-based rate making and distribution system planning, in which hopefully the utilities' financial incentives will actually be aligned with these types of projects, and investing in distributed energy resources or making better, more productive use of customer-owned or sited assets, rather than our current cost of service business model, in which they actually have a financial incentive to oppose these types of projects. So we're working on the short game and trying to just make them look good and say, hey, you're helping Denver with our objectives. Isn't that better than what Boulder's doing, trying to municipalize and racking up millions of dollars in legal bills? Wouldn't you rather work with us? But also playing the long game in terms of, well, how do we help to shift the system in a way in which this creates value for all of the stakeholders who are involved?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we have to conclude. So if we did not get to your question, we apologize. You can please feel free to contact any of the speakers individually, or you can reach out to us at info@solsmart.org, and we will make sure we get back to you. And Danny, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Avery, and thanks to all of our speakers for their willingness to help out with the Q&A and with all the slides throughout this presentation, and giving their insights and their experiences. It's much appreciated. And with that, I think we'll conclude and thank everyone for attending, and we hope you found this informative, and that it'll help you make some decisions regarding your local governments and other policy decisions. So with that, I guess I'll wrap up and just say thanks to everyone, and hope you have a great day.